I want to just welcome everyone one more time. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to be talking about cash flow management during these crazy times. We're going to be mostly focusing on this as an AMA, so really want to hear from you and get your questions in. To that end, if you wouldn't mind just putting your cursor on your screen really fast, you'll see a black bar show up at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a little box that says Q&A. And so when you have questions for Elizabeth, whether it's about the material she's going to spend a few minutes presenting, or questions about how you can apply these learnings to your own business, just drop them in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. If someone puts a question in that box that you are also interested in hearing the answer to, go ahead and click the thumbs up on that. It'll give it an upvote, and we'll know that that's a question a lot of you really want us to get to. We are recording this. We will make the recording available probably tomorrow. And I guess with that said, Elizabeth, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, great. So I'm super excited. Thank you all for coming. And we actually put a cap on this because the purpose of today is actually to answer questions. So.
Uh-oh, we lost her. I'm going to shoot her a message on Slack. And hopefully she comes right back. And in the meantime, doesn't she look excited to talk to us all? Please bear with us, people. We're having small technical difficulties. This is the first time this has happened in the history of our webinars.
I'm sorry, my internet decided to conk out at that exact moment. So as I was saying, we really want to get to through all of your questions. And so I just have actually 2 brief slides just to set some context and to get the juices flowing around how I think about businesses. So I'm just going to go ahead and present these slides. And then we'll move over to questions after that.
Sounds good.
All right. So hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so I think many of you know me in the hat of being a VC, I suppose. But in a prior life, I was an entrepreneur. And actually, I started my last company, LaunchBit, during the last recession. In fact, I left my cushy job at Google in November of 2008. And as you all know, the fall of 2008 was a pretty rough time in the financial markets. Sequoia wrote their Rest in Peace, Good Times memo in October of 2008. And I decided to quit my job anyway, despite that. And lo and behold, when I tried to fundraise in 2009, the money was like basically gone. I could not raise any money until 2011. And for some of my friends who were lucky enough to be able to raise money in 2009, just to give you a sense, the average valuation at the pre-seed level, so you have a product, but maybe no traction, around here in the San Francisco Bay Area, was somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million post-money valuation. Now, I realize that may be market during normal conditions for many other parts of the world, but the San Francisco Bay Area is, notoriously the highest valuations probably in the world. And so this is actually fairly low for here. And so really, I had to figure out how to run a real business without relying on investors. So that's kind of the mindset that I'm coming from. And this is the mindset that I want everybody here to get into, if you're not already. So what do you need to do to kind of think about cash management? Well, there's basically money in and money out. And ideally, you want to bring in money in now and more of it now and defer money out till later, or try to reduce that. So just some quick tactics that I used or really like as well, like with my last company, LaunchBit, we pre-sold a lot of stuff. In fact, we built out basically this ad platform and sold ads before we even built out anything. Like we had no website, no technology. We used my personal PayPal account to collect revenue. We tried to basically pre-sell as much as we could. If you're a SaaS product, you may want to consider annual memberships, getting people to pay you all up front, and even heavily discounting that if you have to. It is much better to get, some of the money up front than unclear about the guaranteed revenue going forward. So start to think in this way. If your market has been affected because of COVID-19, people are not going out, they're not being entertained, nobody's traveling, etc., maybe there are other peripheral revenue sources that you can tap into. So if you can't sell to your actual product or service to your customers right now, that's okay. Maybe there are other things you can sell. So for example, are there online events you can do? Are there online courses you can do? Workshops on Zoom? Paid ebooks, things like that, that will help you build your audience. So it's not a complete distraction, I would say, but it helps you build up your audience who could potentially be your customers when everybody's out of lockdown again, but also helps you keep the lights on. So an example of this is like, I was talking with this product lead from Square yesterday, and she was telling me that a lot of their customers who are restaurants and cafes, they're really struggling because obviously nobody can go. And so what Square is trying to do is help put together programs for these cafe owners to sell gift cards, to do delivery of like baked goods and things like that. So basically all these other streams, maybe teach people how to make cookies on Zoom, things like that. These could potentially be your customers, but also a way for you to get revenue in the door today. And then I think further down the list, if you really have to, add consulting and side jobs and gigs, I definitely did when running my business. A lot of investors will say that's a distraction, but I would say that in this market, like everything goes out the window. This is a completely new market, and I think you just basically have to do whatever it takes to make ends meet. We've talked a little bit online about PPP applications. One of our interns, Will Bricker, actually put together an excellent resource, and we'll share that with everybody on how to actually, go about looking at government loans, at least here in the United States. And then I think the last resort thing in this market is to try to raise a little bit of money. And I'm sure lots of people have questions on this, but I would say, just as a preface, right now it is very challenging to raise money, whether it's in the form of loans or equity. But it can be done probably in little bits and pieces, and we can certainly talk about that. So these are all the things that I want to kind of have you think about in this order, I would even say. All right, so that's cash in. Now cash out. Some of the things that I want you guys to be thinking about is like, okay, well, how can you reduce your expenses? And, I think frankly speaking, for most businesses, like the biggest expense is, people and rent, really. And when you think about people, if you have employees, unfortunately, I think you're going to have to take a really hard look, if you haven't already, at, doing layoffs. This is incredibly hard, just challenging emotionally. But can you, do you need everybody? And I think even post-COVID, what does the world look like? And nobody knows. But if you think it's going to take a really long time for the economy to come back or people to get out of lockdown, and frankly speaking, I think it will take at least a year, like in full swing, and then for the economy to come roaring back will be another 2 or 3 years. I think you are probably realistically looking at layoffs. Now, of course, if it's just you and your co-founder working on this, then perhaps that's not applicable. But if you have a bigger team where you're paying employees, it's definitely something I would recommend. And then for anyone who's remaining, can you either reduce their salary but increase their equivalent in equity? So that's another way for you to save cash. But I think what I want to emphasize here is it's important to keep your remaining team's morale high. And so you don't want people to really be too squeezed to the extent possible. And you also want to make sure that they understand that you are doing right by them. Like your employees, your team is your best asset, really. Otherwise, why do you even have them? And so as such, like, you need to take care of them and know that you have their best interest at heart, even if cash is tight. So what is it that you can offer them that will not, cause a problem with your cash? And equity is certainly a lever if you all believe in this business. And then on the other side of things, rent, I think, one of the things that our portfolio companies are doing and are finding success with is around renegotiating rent. So certainly office rent, you have a lot of leverage right now. I think, frankly speaking, nobody's using their office would be my guess if you're in lockdown. And, some of our companies have even said, look, hey, times are tough. I can't pay this office rent. I'm not even using the office. So I'm going to have to renegotiate. And I would, I'd be willing to pay you whatever, 50%, and lock into a 2-year contract or something like it. That's if you are really bullish that you even want the office, but you may even just want to get rid of the office altogether. And obviously that depends a lot on your business, whether you need an office or not. I think many software businesses do not need an office. On the personal rent side, I even have talked to a lot of founders who are renegotiating their personal rent. And depending on where you live, also, you know, there may even be some rent forgiveness as well. So think about like how you might be able to, you know, change some things up there. Lastly, around service providers, especially for your service providers who have built this into their business model and are big, deep-pocketed companies such as lawyers, you know, some of the big firms, what they've built into the cost is basically the ability to negotiate. I mean, they charge such huge amounts of money per hour, and part of it is, you know, the default rate or the late payment rate is actually pretty high. So, you know, I think if you want to do right by your lawyers, I wouldn't just like default, but I think you should certainly have a conversation with them about, you know, hey, we're not going to be able to pay this bill, you know, in 90 days or whatever it is. Let's talk about this. And very often law firms, you know, the big ones will even do deferred payment for startups in the very beginning, even during a non-recession, like, hey, we will defer up to $10,000 of expenses until you raise your Series A or whatever. So these are definitely leverage that you can move. And often it makes the difference between staying alive and not. So those are my 2 slides. And I just want you guys to kind of start thinking about cash in and cash out in this way. Let's dig into your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. So let's dive in. So question number 1, what's the best way to determine the valuation of a tech startup pre-revenue but post-product and traction? No.
Yeah, so I think this applies in any market. You know, really valuation is a matter of supply and demand, like supply of your fundraising round and demand of investors. And this is why you see across different geographies, there are different valuations. In the San Francisco Bay Area, there are just a lot of investors. It doesn't mean that companies in the Bay Area are better than elsewhere. Now, how this pertains to COVID in your situation, well, there are fewer investors. And the reason for that is the public stock markets have tanked a fair bit, and angels are now worth less. I don't want to say they're worthless. They are now worth less. And as a result, actually, even microfunds, many of whom raise money from angels, now have smaller funds than they had anticipated as well, because they're not able to raise either. So you just have less money being invested in this ecosystem, and therefore there's less demand. And so I think that's the theory behind it. Now, what's the practice? Well, what I would do, frankly speaking, is don't talk valuation anytime, whether it's now or post-COVID or whatever. Don't talk valuation until somebody is really on the hook. Like, pitch them, ask them, hey, what do you think? Can I count you in? And if they're like, yes, depending on the valuation, then talk valuation and just, you know, be very frank about what you're looking for. And they say, well, that's too high. Then you have a discussion about it. But if they say, well, I'm still thinking about it, then they're not even really ready to invest. Like, if they're not ready to invest, valuation is irrelevant. So make sure you actually have them on the hook before you actually try to reel them in.
Okay. And I guess as a follow-up to that, do you think that startup founders need to be flexible with their valuations? Like, if an investor says, I would like to invest, but that valuation is too high, this is what I would be comfortable with. Is it the founder? I mean, obviously it's a choice, but should the founder, in your opinion, meet them there, or say, okay, well, you obviously don't value it the way I think you should, so I'm not going to move forward with you?
So I think that's going to vary a lot based on individuals. And I think it comes down to how desperately do you want that investor or their money, one of the two. And I unfortunately can't answer that because, I mean, I think there are definitely cases where.
Oh no, we lost you again. Okay, let's see. Give her a second to come back. In the meantime, someone asked me, what's my favorite TV show? Which isn't related to cash flow management or fundraising, but probably up there is going to be Parks and Rec, The Office. I know, really original stuff. Let's see. I think Elizabeth is trying to get in touch with me here. I'm so sorry, people. Give me 1 second. Okay, well, I just let her know that we lost her again. We'll see if she can come back here. Someone else asked if this recording is going to be, if this is being recorded. Yes, it is. And we will send out the recording and hopefully try and edit out some of these technical difficulties. Someone else asked, where would you recommend doing your PPP application? This person did it through Cabbage as their bank didn't accept it. Are there any alternatives? Different banks are offering, not every bank has been approved to be able to offer PPPs. So it's really up to you to find a bank that has been approved for the PPP process. If you go onto the SBA website, that's Small Business Administration, I believe they have a list there of banks that have been approved. It's being updated constantly. I know Bank of America is doing it, has been approved. I believe Wells Fargo. So some of the more major banks. I don't think Silicon Valley Bank has been approved, but First Republic, I believe, has. We have Elizabeth mentioned this, we have an awesome resource that one of our colleagues, Will Bricker, did that puts together like basically everything you need to know about PPPs. We'll send that out in an email post webinar so that you can review it, and let us know if you have any questions about that. Let's see. Another person asked, how is Hustle Fund supporting its portfolio companies in the current environment? We're doing, oh, she's back. Hey, Elizabeth.
Sorry.
That's
This
okay.
is the worst.
We went through some questions.
Okay, great. Maybe just duck out then.
Yeah, feel free to come and go. No, so I think, did we answer that last one? I think so. Basically, it's going to be up to the founder how they're going to approach valuation. So let's move on.
Yep.
This was the one I was just about to address, so I was hoping you can instead. How is Hustle Fund supporting its portfolio companies in the current environment?
It's a good question. So it differs a lot depending on the company. I would say first and foremost, like, this is going to sound super floofy, but like morale support. You know, I think everybody, whether you're doing well or you're totally hosed by this, you know, has been affected. I know I personally have been quite stressed for many weeks just because of the environment. And so, you know, I think just being a lending ear about, you know, hearing people's issues and kind of less about advice and more just listening is like a big one. But then I think in some cases where we've actually gotten more involved, like actually pretty involved with, I'd say, about a handful of our portfolio companies where they've been really affected, where it's like, oh gosh, sales have dropped to zero. What do we do? Well, maybe we can help them kind of go line by line through their cash, help them even with the messaging around layoffs, you know, help them think through compensation going forward for people who remain, tactical things like that.
Thank you. Is now an okay time to raise from angels or pre-seed funds? If not, when would be a better time?
So now is not a great time just in general to raise. So if you don't need to raise right now, I would not recommend raising. And the reason is, you know, I think frankly speaking, a lot of investors are not used to investing over Zoom. Like, I think that's just sort of the reality of it. And through this lockdown, I think as long as we're in this lockdown, it's just going to be really hard. You will get investors who will talk with you. You will get investors interested. It will be really hard to close them unless you have met them before in person. And for us at Hustle Fund, you know, frankly speaking, it's a little bit puzzling because we do all of our investing over Zoom. But I understand that if people have not, then that's just something new. So that's my short answer. But that being said, if you absolutely have to do it, I would go to angels and just like try to find rich people here and there, ask friends for leads. It just may be an exercise in trying to figure out who is out there in existence, because angels often are not very public. There are no directories except for people like Ashton Kutcher who are overwhelmed anyway. So you're talking about who was early at Uber, who was early at Stripe, who was early at Plaid, who was early at Slack, early at Square, all these companies, Zoom, you know, there are angels in all of these companies who are investing.
Thank you. Do you think startups backed by VCs should be able to get a loan for the PPP program?
As an ethical question or as a logistical question?
I think it's a logistical question.
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Like logistically, yes. Like the way that things have been written in law, like you will be, you can potentially get it. I don't think every VC-backed company will qualify, and this is where I think looking at Will Bricker's site and going through those details will be really helpful, and we can send that link out later.
Okay, great. And just so you know, we've got about 49 questions, so I'm just gonna rapid fire as many as I can.
Yep.
Given the current environment, in lieu of traditional metrics and traction that investors might be looking for, what are some other meaningful ways to build or maintain rapport with investors while moving the business forward?
I mean, I think there's always the question of like, how far in advance should you build rapport? And there are two camps on it. I'm in the camp that you should not spend too much time building relationships with investors. Focus on building the business and growing the business. And if you have that, then investors will be a lot more excited than you're just meeting with them. And I think especially in this environment where you can't even meet with them in person, I think people don't even treat it as a real meeting. So I think if you're in the stage of, I'm not pitching right now, but I want to, quote, build relationships, I would probably just scratch that altogether.
Okay, great. Someone's wondering if you can give more color about how you sold advertising before you had product.
Yeah, good question. So I basically cold emailed a bunch of marketers and was like, hey, I think I have this new really engaging ad that has high performance. Do you want to try it out? And it basically was like, pay $1,000 and I'll get in front of this many people and see what happens. And so we just actually manually placed the ads in the beginning before there was any tech. And that was that.
Awesome, scrappy. Okay, so for a tech company, when taking consulting work, what are things that they should put in the consulting agreement to prevent IP issues in the future?
You mean somebody potentially stealing IP?
Yeah, I think so.
So there are a lot of templated docs. If you're already working with a lawyer, your lawyer should probably have templated contractor agreements that basically cover this. I would not try to write one from scratch yourself. There are a lot of templated docs out there, and I would probably look. I know that a lot of real lawyers don't like my recommending like LegalZoom or any of these others, but you may want to also just look there.
Cool. Here's a question about layoffs. What are your thoughts in terms of not laying people off, but instead collectively sharing the pain by implementing salary reductions or implementing like non-paid time, like furlough, I guess, essentially?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think people will be in many camps here, but I think the way I think about it is it's really important, like however you slice and dice it, whoever's remaining at the company, whether it's just you or whether there are other people, like morale has to be as high as possible. So if you're going to cut salaries, I think that's fine, but in general, that doesn't lead to good morale. So you have to do it kind of in a way that you can keep morale high. And so as I mentioned, like if you do want to keep everybody and everybody can be retained kind of in the way that I mentioned on the slide, like everybody can take a salary cut and these employees can get more equity and basically eats into your equity, like that could actually keep morale high, like especially if everyone believes in the business and doesn't have huge cash needs. But I think it's very case by case, where in some cases it may actually bring morale down if your employees are struggling, then it will be hard for them to be focused on work, and then that will just be a problem too.
Okay. You mentioned that some pre-traction projects are having a hard time raising. Can you clarify what counts as traction, and can you give some quantitative measures that count as traction?
Unfortunately not. So traction in itself, like forget traction. I think it goes back to supply and demand of your fundraising round. So in the case where, your round size has basically remained the same, but, and the number of companies raising is more, let's just say roughly has remained the same, but you're talking about like a big drop in demand from investors, then all of a sudden it means that investors not only can, quote, get better valuations, but can also be pickier about the ones they select, because it's just the pendulum has shifted power a bit back towards investors. And so it's not so much like, well, if you're at 10,000 MRR or, there are no benchmarks. It's more about like, are you going to be if an investor's only doing one deal, are you that best deal that investor is going to see? And So I can't give you a straight answer on this because it's like, I can't say, oh, well, if you get to 10K MRR, like you're definitely going to be able to raise. I think my general sense of the market, 3 months ago, call it, was if you were at 10K per month in revenue, there are a lot of seed investors. And I wouldn't say it makes fundraising easy, but it made fundraising easier than at pre-seed when you have no revenue or, $2,000 per month in revenue. Like I could have said with confidence a few months ago that 10K MRR was real, and that often other investors told me that that was what they were looking for. But in this market, I don't know. Like I don't even know who's investing. I talk with all these VCs and a lot of angels, and almost everybody has kind of told me secretly, like, yeah, we're taking meetings and we're looking, but haven't done anything. And so it's hard for me to then say.
That's fair. Someone actually, there's a good follow-up, is wondering if we are currently investing or planning to deploy any capital in the coming weeks and months.
Yes. So I'll give you my like the true answer here is we are still investing at the pace of like one company per week. So, is like basically looking at it as like, is this the best company I'm going to see all week kind of, and that's amongst the partnership, not just me. So throughout this like COVID lockdown time, we've done 3 investments. And these are companies, because we've always had a Zoom interview process. So workflow wise, nothing is new for us. However, I would say that we're even slower than usual. And we're pretty slow to even get to the interview stage, frankly speaking. And maybe some of you have felt it. So I apologize about that. But we're even slower than usual because, we're working with our existing portfolio companies. And so we're taking a lot more meetings there. And then, frankly speaking, I mean, you don't hear it now, but like you might ordinarily hear on another day, like my children running around, right? And so they're like personal responsibilities that didn't exist before during the day as well. So everything's just slower, even if investors are investing.
On that note, Marcus just put in the chat to everyone. You can see that he is investing right now. So maybe give Marcus a shout. Okay, here's a good one. So do investors, specifically pre-seed, seed, and angel investors, invest in companies where the entrepreneur is in another country, but it's a US entity, where the founder and the team is remote and distributed?
That will depend a lot. It's a good question, because if you'd asked me 3 months ago, I would have probably said that a lot of US investors are still not that excited about that model. That being said, I think this remote thing will actually help change people's minds on that. For us at Hustle Fund, like we do require our companies to be US entities or Canadian entities or in Southeast Asia, like Singaporean entities. But for the most part, we have wanted people to also be physically located in the US and Canada. Whether we change our stance on that, I think it probably depends case by case. Like certainly if the company is a B2B SaaS company going after the global market, that's a lot easier to get behind. But if it's like, well, you're going after the local market where we don't understand anything about how the local market works, then I think that's going to be hard. So I don't know the details on this business, but I actually think that this COVID thing probably works more in your favor than 3 months ago once we get out of this.
Okay, cool. Ramona is asking if you can talk more about pre-product, pre-pay sales tactics in this market.
Pre-product, pre-pay.
Pre-product, pre-pay. So earlier you mentioned, right, selling ads, but you didn't have your product yet. She's wondering if you can just talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's scary. Like I didn't think that anybody would buy my ads. And frankly speaking, a lot of people didn't. Like that's what I'm not telling you. Like, yes, I did, sell a few $1,000s of ads, but there were many people who were like, well, come back when you have something, or ignored my email, or were like, kind of go away in a nice way. So, I think there's a numbers game there that isn't really talked about for sure. I think it also depends on the framing of it too, right? Like, so I have a blog post on cold emailing, and I'd say the number one driver for successful cold emails is, are you helping somebody accomplish something? And I think for most people, it's are you helping them make more money? And so that was my pitch with the ads. It wasn't like I'm a cost center. It's like, hey, I'm going to help you buy these ads, and they have strong performance and have helped other people make more money. And so as much as you can tie that to like, hey, we've done some tests in this with our prototype or whatever, and we have driven sales by 2x or whatever, or we think we can drive your sales up to 2x, like you can use some fillers like that if you don't actually have those numbers. Then I think the more you can do that, like the easier it is. But if it's like, well, I'm selling you a widget and it looks nice, that's a much harder sell. Yeah, without knowing about your product, I think it's a little bit hard to talk to that though.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, we've got a few questions about M&As, mergers and acquisitions. So for companies who are not going to benefit from COVID, do you think that mergers and acquisitions is a serious option worth considering? And if so, how should they think about it?
It's interesting because my first reaction is, well, in which direction? And the reason is, I think a lot of people are a little bit down in the dumps about about everything, but in particular with the business landscape, it's like, gosh, I'm not doing well, like my sales have dropped, etc. But also think about like your competitors. Like if you're in a market where you're going head to head with some other people, whether it's other startups or even bigger players, I'm sure they're not doing well either, right? Like this is a situation that's affecting everybody. And what has previously been a benefit to companies, such as having raised a lot of money in this market, actually is a detriment in many cases. So for example, if you have a competitor who's raised $10 million, I'm sure that they've started spending that $10 million and have a high burn rate. And all of a sudden their decisions might be harder than yours if you're a seed stage company, because they have to cut a lot of people down to a skeleton crew, and they have to make it work operationally and keep morale up. Like, oh my gosh, they just cut 90% of their team. Like that's a lot harder than what you have to deal with as a small company. And in fact, if those bigger companies don't make the right steps, they could actually end up going belly up before you do. So it may actually be an opportunity for you to pick up a bigger company for free. And in these times, I actually see a lot of companies acquiring other companies for $0. Like you think you don't have much money, but that's okay. Like you can often leverage things into acquisitions if people were going to go belly up anyway, right? So I would actually encourage everyone to kind of think in that mindset of like, actually, I'm a pretty lean company. I only have 2 people. I don't have much money, but can I be acquisitive during these times and get business from other people? And that's kind of the mindset I would be in, actually.
What leverage do you think a small business like that has over a larger business? I mean, I understand that the larger business might be in more trouble, but can you talk about the leverage points?
If the larger business is going to go out of business anyway, then it's an easier sell, obviously, because what you are offering is, I think a lot of people think of acquisitions as about money and return on investment. But in these distressed situations, it's not about that at all. Like the bigger company is not going to be able to pay back their investors. They're not going to return anything, and the founders are not going to make money. So what is it that they're interested in? Well, they're interested in saving face. The founders are interested in saying that they had an acquisition. The founders are interested in doing right as much as possible, doing right by their investors, but getting as much money as they can, or getting whatever they can. It could be your equity. The founders are interested in maintaining relationships with their business partners or their customers. So if you can take that over and continue it for them, and they have trust that you can do that, then that's also great too. So relationships are actually a pretty powerful thing, where things are not just about money, but like, can you help people with their people problems? And that could be something that comes into play in this market.
Cool, thanks. Okay. How can you tell if a Zoom VC meeting is going well?
Well, for any meeting, whether it's Zoom or not, like I would, certainly if it's a small investor, like an angel or a microfund, I would actually just ask them at the end of the meeting. So, so what do you think? Like, can we, like, literally you can use the words, can I count you in? An old mentor of mine taught me that phrase because I was asking, like, how do you ask for money? Like, will you invest? That feels a little awkward, but can I count you in is like the very direct but yet subtle way of saying, like, will you be an investor?
Yeah.
And people will just tell you. Like, I think some people are a little cagey about it, but you can kind of get a sense from the response to that answer.
Nice. I actually also recommend doing that in job interviews if you're the interviewee, just as a side note. Okay, here's someone specific company situation. We are a manufacturing company. We do custom printed roller shades. Okay, we launched right when all this stuff hit, but we can operate and produce product. We plan to start marketing within a few weeks, but should we aggressively discount ourselves in this environment? If so, should we do it right out the gate or slowly increase the discount depending on who bites?
I mean, I wouldn't recommend necessarily going to discounts right away, especially if you've not tested the waters. Actually, it's funny in this landscape. Certainly, there are a lot of businesses that are not doing well, and a lot of sectors that are not doing well, but there are other sectors that are actually doing incredibly well and are benefiting. So if people, are buying more, actually, e-commerce as a sector has gone up. I'm not quite sure how you're selling these, but if it's online, it may actually be good for your sales, as funny as it sounds. So I've definitely tested first.
Okay. And then in terms of if they decide to do discounts, do you have any thoughts on whether someone should discount, like increase discounts, like start with a small discount and then increase that if, I guess, the audience is asking for it?
In general, I'm not a big fan of using discounts as a lever, like using price or, being the lowest cost offering. I feel like it just kind of spirals down to zero eventually and affects your margins. So why is it that people buy from you? They like your design better. They like your convenience, your speed to ship, or whatever it is, reliability. I would prefer to like compete on one of those axes first. I think if you want to test discounts, my recommendation would be to just, do some quick split tests of sorts and see if that matters, especially if you're trying to figure out what the pricing should be. But if you're in a market where you already have a good sense of what competitors' pricing is, then I would imagine you don't have to do much of that testing.
Mm-hmm. Also, just to add on to that really quickly, I will say that if you start discounting right away and you start discounting a lot, or you do increasingly big discounts, you are training your audience to believe that they can always get a discount from you, which not generally wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as a very early company with very low burn, we're just the founders on the team, should we focus on revenue or take this time to work on the product and then shift to revenue once spending picks back up?
I'm a very revenue-driven person, and mostly actually out of a school of hard knocks. When I first left my cushy job, we built out all this product and had all these side projects that went nowhere, and it's because nobody wanted it. And so that's actually how we ended up with LaunchBit pre-selling ads, because I was just so frustrated with, like, that was like our 8th side project, by the way. So the 7 others didn't work out. And so I'm just a big fan of like testing the sales as quickly as you can and doing as little as you need to get to that answer. So I would very much try to start selling right away for most things.
Okay, thank you. How did you get involved in VC, and what is your advice for other women trying to do the same?
I'd say I'm an accidental VC in that, like, I grew up here in the Silicon Valley, and so I think, and during the dot-com boom, by the way, so my mentality was always like, oh, I'm going to build a company and all this other stuff. And it never, like, I didn't even really know what a VC was until I was fundraising from, potential would-be investors. And so I think I've always had the mindset of like, I like solving problems and I want to continue to solve problems. I think, the long and the short of it is starting your own VC, such as Hustle Fund, is very different from getting a job at another VC. And for me, actually building out Hustle Fund is very much like building a startup. We're not a product startup, but we have all the same problems you do. Like, we have to fundraise, we have to market ourselves, the 2 probably biggest things that every startup has. And I just actually really love that. And for us, we have a real mission of what we want to solve. Like, I mean, I don't want to dig too much into this, but I think in general, VC is unfair. And I think that in general, the best founders don't necessarily get access to the best, resources or money, even if you are a great hustler. And so we're trying to change that. It will be a long process. It will take 30 years, but that's what we want to change with Hustle Fund. So I know I didn't answer your question. I don't know what it's like to get into real VC.
Okay, gosh, we have so many questions. Do you encourage your portfolio founders to apply for and join accelerators?
I think it kind of goes back to, again, just in general, like, what do you need an investor for? Money, maybe guidance or help. Accelerators, as you all know, like tend to be a little bit more expensive on the cap table, but it could be well worth it if you need the brand, or if you're in a specialized accelerator that can get you access to special people or materials or things or machines or whatever it is. It could be very well worth it depending on your circumstances. And I think, just frankly speaking, if those other things like the network or the machines or the people or the knowledge or whatever, if those other things are not needed, if you're in desperate straits and you want quick money, that's an expensive form of money, but it may be well worth it if you need the money, right? So it will vary case by case.
Okay. Okay, here's a specific one. Our average salary is $80K for our startup employees, and we're looking for an engineer. Outside of more equity or more cash, are there other ways to encourage engineers to join our startup, especially since engineers are used to being paid 130 to 160K? This person must be in the Bay.
Yeah, I would probably encourage you to look remote. Salaries elsewhere are a lot cheaper. Like, I mean, just from past experience, I've been in a past life, I've invested in a lot of international companies, and you can find amazing engineers in Argentina and Taiwan for like definitely not 120K. I was just talking with our venture partner, Sijin, last night, and she's based in Taipei, and the going rate there, like for a senior engineer, like well paid, would be like 50K US.
Wow.
So, I would kind of look around and ask around. I'm sure you have friends who are in this actually global economy who are hiring people abroad. And I think it's more about finding somebody who has access to talent and then getting into that network so you can maybe, work with one of those people's friends. I think that's probably the best way, rather than trying to go to Upwork and like sort through people.
Cool. Okay, one of your recent emails, probably from your newsletter, emphasized that founders should have a good grasp on their funnel. Can you share a little bit about the metrics and milestones you look for in, wait for it, a consumer mobile app startup in order for you to consider investing?
Without knowing anything about the idea, I would just say, just in general at Hustle Fund, we don't do a lot in consumer. And the reason actually is this, which is, I mean, let's just think about a funnel, right? Like a very basic funnel is you have people coming in to your site. Maybe they're going to the app store, and maybe they're going to download your app. Then after that, they're going to sign in or create an account, and they're going to sign in and they're going to use your app, and then maybe they'll buy or they subscribe or whatever it is. There is so much friction in that, like even just like not even knowing what you do, but just like in finding out about you, in going to the app store and downloading the app, getting attention on your screen, using the app, logging into the app, creating an account for the app, like buying on the app or subscribing or whatever it is, like all those steps, even well before knowing what you do. And I think that's something that I just see in the data, but I think just intuitively something we all know, like we all like have 10 billion apps and we're deleting new apps now. I think the app store is a lot more competitive now than it was in, call it 2009. And so, I don't know how far along you are, but I would kind of encourage you to think about that funnel, because basically then what you're saying is like, if you pay $1 to get that initial lead, and there's some very small fraction who ends up converting, probably less than 1% in the end as a paying user, then that person has to be worth at least like $100 to you. And that's just hard to make work. And the other thing is around payback period, whether you're B2B or consumers, if you don't have a lot of money, there's certainly lots of articles on the web, like talking about like David Scope from Matrix Partners has this article on B2B payback periods. And I think in there he recommends something like 3 months or something like that. I think that's fine if you have the money to basically spend, let's say, $100 and get it paid back in 3 months. If you're a bootstrap startup or you've raised a small seed round or even $1 million, my recommendation would be trying to get paid back immediately, like on that first sale. So now you're asking people to pay you $100 right out of the gates or in that first month. And that's hard for most products. It can be done. So it depends a lot on the business and the details of the business, but that's how I think about it. Like, how can everyone get their payback period to be like right away? And then over time, as you raise money, then you can increase your payback period. And as you figure out how long people stick around with you or do repeat buys. That's just how I look at it.
Okay, thank you. So this company is, they facilitate remote side gigs. So in this market, it seems like something that could actually benefit from COVID potentially. One of their advisors said it would be good to reach out to seed funds around raising. Is there anything different they should be doing when trying to garner funding during a bear market versus a bull market?
I don't think so.
How should a company that could benefit from the current crisis approach fundraising right now?
I don't think it actually differs, but I do think, just as general piece of advice for everyone, you need to be able to address how the COVID market affects your business. And you need to be able to have a compelling argument for why it actually propels your business. And if you don't have that, if it's like a neutral argument or certainly COVID negatively affects your business, I would say that VCs or even angels are really not interested.
Okay. Do you know anyone who's actually received a PPP loan? And do you know how long it has taken for them to get a response?
Yes, I do. And they haven't received the loan yet, but they have received positive notice that they will get it. And so what date is today? Like
the 15th.
15th. And when did they open? When did PPP applications opened on what, the 2nd?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, so they heard back within, like, call it 10 days, and they haven't received it yet, but yeah.
Cool. What are your thoughts on equity crowdfunding in this current environment? A lot of people have been asking about like Kickstarter and stuff like that. Is that a route you think people should explore?
If you have a physical product, Kickstarter, I think, yeah, certainly. Basically, clever ways like that to get money in the door up front, I think any and all I would consider for sure.
Cool. In regards to layoffs, is it better to cut deep once, like do one big round of layoffs, or do multiple cuts as they learn more about what the future will look like?
I'm a big fan of cutting deeply once because, again, it's about managing the morale of people who remain. So if there's fear, like if you do the second one, then all of a sudden everybody who's left is afraid, like, wow, I could be cut next time. So I would encourage you to cut more deeply than you think you need to on that first one.
Okay. What are some of the creative ways people have made money from online events or courses? We can't really hear too much from the crowd, although if you have a story and you want to put in the chats, please do. But Elizabeth, if you have any information here.
Like, for example, gyms, they're now doing classes on Zoom, like yoga instructors trying to like coach over Zoom, musical lessons as well, things along those lines. There's a guy who runs I guess a cooking show of sorts. Basically, he's just cooking on his YouTube channel, but he runs a restaurant around here. And so that, I mean, all these that I'm mentioning are Main Street businesses, but I'm sure there's something kind of along these lines for most people's businesses. Virtual wine tours, I've heard.
That sounds fun. Okay, so we kind of talked about this a little bit, but does Hustle Fund predominantly invest in B2B? How do you look at consumer companies at pre-seed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for us, it's less about, oh, we love this sector or we love B2B. I mean, I do love B2B, but we also pass on many B2B businesses. So I think it's less about that and more about what do we think the customer acquisition is going to look like. So kind of how I walked everyone through, like, how do I think about the funnel? Like, let's just walk through all the steps, like even as a consumer, where it's like, well, first I'd have to do this, and then I'd have to download that, and then I'd have to do that, and have to sign up for this account, and then I'd have to pay, and all this. And by the time you go through all of this, like, we've all been through it as consumers, like, we'll just drop off if it's like not a real need. And so that's exactly how I think about it, where it's like, okay, well, by the time you get to these number of steps and this product is worth X, like, you know, like, how is the payback period going to be? Do I think you can actually even make money on the unit economics here? So that's kind of how I think about it. And that's why then what tends to fit these things? Well, B2B, you can tend to charge more. Businesses will pay if you're helping them make money or things like that. I mean, people won't pay for all B2B services, but like things along those lines, like if you're charging $1,000 a month, then you have a lot more wiggle room to acquire too.
Sure. How are rev share based investments generally structured?
Rev shared investment based.
Yeah, maybe more like well, we talked about as a alternative forms of fundraising. I'm wondering if this person is talking more about flywheel versus instead of equity.
Yeah. So I don't know if this question is getting at revenue-based financing, which is basically an entrepreneur-friendly loan. So revenue-based financing is basically, well, a regular loan, we all know, I give you $100, you pay me $100 back in 2 years with interest, or I come and cut off your legs. That's how regular loans work. For revenue-based financing, it's a similar mechanism in that I give you $100 and you're going to pay me, let's say, I don't know, 120 in total back in a couple of years. But the way it's going to be paid back is as a percentage of your revenue. So every month, you know, you give me back whatever, 5%, another 5% until you pay off that 120. And so if you don't make money next month, I don't get paid back anything. If you, let's say it's Christmas is coming up and your sales have gone through the roof, you know, it's a bigger chunk of money because it's the same percentage every month. So that's how that works. I mean, for revenue-based financing, I think the long and the short of it is there are a lot of revenue-based financing players these days, and I think that's great for startups. We even have a separate fund that does that now. And but you need to have some past history of having revenue, so it doesn't apply to everybody. Generally speaking, I would say you would need at least $10,000 per month, not a hard and fast rule. But it's a very fast decision-making process because they just look at the numbers. They don't ask you about TAM or anything, but they just look at, like, what is the revenue that you've been doing? Great, yes or no. You can usually get an answer within like a week.
Wow, that's quick.
Yeah, it's fast.
Okay, what is the best way to pitch a two-sided market?
It's hard. I mean, so that basically it's you know, you're constantly running from one side to the next. And in general, I would say this is a much longer story about marketplaces, but like, you know, I think you want to get the supply in place first and like kind of hold them off without having to really pay them if you can, and then go and look for the demand. So for example, for Uber, they paid drivers initially a very cheap amount to basically just have their cars on hand, but didn't utilize them. For us at LaunchBit, also two-sided marketplace, we asked publishers to basically just list themselves on hand, but didn't really bother them in the beginning. So that's kind of how people tend to get things going.
Got it. So get the supply first. Okay. This is sort of a technical question. If you have a seasonal business, to arrive at monthly annual recurring revenue, ARR, do you simply divide annual revenues by 12, or is there a different formula that you recommend?
Annual revenue, is it recurring? I think I'm not clear about like how it can be recurring if it's
ARR. So, I mean, annual recurring revenue. Yeah, it's recurring. But it's seasonal, so it's not the same every month.
I'm gonna guess it's not recurring, like if, you know, Christmas season comes or whatever. But I think so. if you were a subscription business and you charge all up front, the way in accounting people tend to do it is like, okay, well, they recognize the revenue across all 12 months. Even though the cash is all up front, it gets recognized in your books across all 12 months. But in this case, if it's like one lump at the end, like, that is both when the revenue comes in and also when the cash comes in. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but.
Okay, that's okay. Let's move on. Some of the advice we've gotten is to wait it out a few weeks until there's less uncertainty. What signs should we look for to see if it's time to start pursuing meetings?
I think just when we're out of the lockdown and you can actually physically meet with people is a good time to do that. I don't know if we will be out of any recession or whatever, but again, I think the big hang up for VCs is like they don't feel comfortable making investment decisions online.
Okay. Someone is wondering how you can go about finding potential angel investors. Like, where do you go to find wealthy people? You talked a little bit about early employees at big companies.
Yep. Maybe we should share our other online event about finding angels.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Elizabeth did a webinar a couple of months towards the end of last year that addressed this very topic. So I'll share the link in my post-webinar email with you guys. Okay. How do due diligence questions differ now versus pre-COVID? And do you think they might change after COVID?
I mean, I think they're largely going to stay the same, right? It's about your business and how you think about things, customer acquisition, the product, the solution, et cetera, your team. That all is going to stay the same. The only thing that's different now is you absolutely have to, again, address like how COVID affects your business and speculate also how post-COVID, this will affect your business. And you need to have a really good story around it. If you're in a category that will do well, then that's great. But if you're not, like if you're in a category where it's like net neutral, like let's say B2B, your run-of-the-mill B2B SaaS product, you have to be able to explain like why an investment in that is important now. Because when you think about it, investors are also considering like investing maybe in telemedicine businesses that are really benefiting. It's not about whether you're a good investment, but it's a matter of my money that I'm putting in one of these companies, like where should I put it? That's how I would think about it. It's not about, is my company good or bad? It's, I'm competing with all these companies for a limited amount of money. So how can I present myself in the best light?
Okay. Well, we've got like 1 more minute. So let's see. When you invest, what amount of equity do you usually take? Also, YC has 4 different safe types. Which one do you use? 2-part question.
It varies quite a bit. Yeah. I mean, I think just to give you a sense of the range of what we've done everything from 250K post money to 31 million post money. So I don't know if it's very helpful to people, but in general, we do tend to prefer sort of the lower end of things, but geography will be a factor as well in that.
Okay.
And in terms of which safe, it's just the one with the post money valuation with a discount, I believe is that one.
Yeah. Cool. And I know it's time, but there's one question I've seen kind of a few times. So for folks that are kind of in the middle of fundraising, maybe they got some confirmations from people who are interested, but now COVID has sort of changed everything and those investors are going quiet. How would you recommend those people proceed? Is it worth continuing to push at them, or is there another approach? Should they like basically call it a loss?
No, I would definitely continue to be persistent in your follow-ups. I mean, I think the caveat is like, just know that everything is slower on both personal fronts and professional fronts, right? Like put yourself in your customer's shoes. So in this case, it's your investor shoes, like 2 little kids running around all day, like playing, school teacher for half the day. And then also you have all your portfolio companies like calling you up, et cetera. So it's like, where is that? That's where all the time goes. So now it's like any extra time we're looking at new companies. So that's one thing. And so knowing that, like, don't lash out, be polite, like, don't say like, where the hell have you been? Like, even if that's how you're feeling, it is frustrating. I understand that. But definitely do follow up just politely.
Okay, good. Thank you. We have so many more questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We are at time. But Thank you so much for participating. Elizabeth, thank you so much for answering all these questions.
Thank you all. And I'm so sorry that my internet dropped out.
We did record this. We will process it, send out the link no later than tomorrow, along with some of the other resources we mentioned here today.
Cool. Thank
Cool.
you.
Bye.
Bye.